This conference will now be recorded.
All right, so we're going to talk through kind of the other EIV reports today. 2 months ago, we touched on the EIV income discrepancy report. Today, we're talking about the other 2/3 of that, the summary report and the income report. We're going to go pretty far in depth into the income report, into each of the sections. Then we'll talk about the new hires report. We just made some changes in how Susan, Payal, and John are reviewing that and kind of the next steps after they find something. So we'll talk through those changes. And then hopefully we have some time left for questions at the end. So this kind of, wraps up, if you will, our EIV section. 2 months ago, we did EIV income discrepancy reports. Last month, we did repayment agreements. Now we're talking about the other income report. So if there's any still lingering outstanding questions, or if anybody has any specific EIV reports you want to kind of all look at together, we should hopefully have some time afterwards to do that. All right, so we got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 in. Anybody else gonna hop on?
Ryan, I would, but since I'm going to be getting off early, it's not fair. I'm not going to win.
Fair enough. Let's see, from the call, looks like Sandra and Sarah are those who haven't joined.
Is it Sandra Winston?
Yes.
Okay.
There she is.
Sandra, is that Sandra D, like from Greece?
Being that you mentioned that, and this is a dedication to Olivia Newton-John. Look at me, I'm Sandra D. I just thought I'd do that rendition, but yes.
Crazy. I just saw Grease for the first time in I don't know, 2 months ago. It was the first time I'd ever seen it.
What? Oh my God.
I was really fine living my whole life without seeing it, to be honest.
Let's play over. You better shape up. Did you hear that song? You better shape up.
I heard them all. I don't know. All right, let's go ahead and go. So best to prepare a repayment agreement before the certs are signed, after the certs are signed, or when the certifications are posted to the ledger. Talked about this last month. Best is kind of tough to define, but best. Got 2 answers in. Three, 4, 5. Eight out of 9. One more. Going once, going twice. There we are. Before the certs are signed is correct. So yeah, before the certs are signed, lets us post both the certs and the repayment agreement around the same time. And that prevents that wild swing on the ledger, right? Where suddenly they owe $2,000, then they owe nothing, going back and forth, and keeps the ledger clean, keeps the TAR manageable and understandable. There's not that middle period with one or the other. So before they're signed is best. Plus, you're bringing in the residents once to discuss the issue, right? These are the certs you're signing. This is reflecting the income that you didn't report or underreported. Now you owe all this. This is what you need to sign to repay that back over the next several months.
Brian,
this is from.
I'm sorry to interrupt.
Yes.
What happens if they refuse to sign? Can you explain that to everyone? If they're refusing to sign the installment or the repayment agreement, but they are willing to sign the certs, but not the repayment agreement.
So if they sign the certs but not the repayment agreement, they owe the money that's going to be reflected on their ledger. It flat out, that's it. So non-payment of rent, eviction for non-payment of rent is our next step. I will say, and I said this last week, a lot of times the message you're getting from compliance, whether it's Christian or me or Nancy or Kyle, Susan, John, anyone, we're saying, you know, we need to get the repayment agreement signed. We need to get the repayment agreement signed. If they're refusing to do that, though, let us know, because the change then is, you know, the resident owes all that money. We then pursue eviction, and we're not going to keep hounding you about, hey, when is this going to get signed? We already answered that. So this is from John's audit trend email. What box in Yardi do you have to check on the IC so that the next recert date and security deposit amount don't reset? If you're creating an IC in Yardi, it's gonna push the next recert date a year out, which could be wrong or could be right. It's gonna reset the security deposit amount on the cert to the current TTP, which would be miraculous if it was still right. That's probably wrong. So you got to check a box. Which box is it? User calculation, rent override, baseline, or income verification required? I'm waiting on one more. Probably frantically searching their inbox for John's email. There we are. User calculation is right. So user calculation box is the one that does it. Rent override, you would think, but it does not. And then baseline cert, you never want to check. And then income verification required is related to move-ins and ICs. All right, so let's jump in and start talking about EIV. I'll just note nearly everything in this I got from the EIV reports processing SPG, which is, to be honest, probably one of the lesser known SPGs, but certainly one of the most important. And I'll say from the outset too, EIV is something that's near and dear to HUD's heart. It's something they care about quite a bit. It originally came out of the George Bush administration, and the idea was making sure the right benefits go to the right people. And HUD came up with EIV, and it's still super important to them that we use it, that we are confirming that, you know, residents are paying their portion of rent, and that this is a tool to help ensure that that's happening. So let's start off with the income reports. So when you're printing ARs and IRs, you're printing 3 separate reports. So summary, income, and income discrepancy report. It's easiest certainly to just pull them all up and use the print all button, right? It's only the income report that's printed within 90 days of tax transmission. So Christian sends that email out saying, hey, here's your household, so you need to print EIV. On that one, we're only printing the income report, not the summary and not the income discrepancy. Just walking through the summary report, what this is HUD taking our data and trying to match it with a person within the SSA and the National Department of New Hires records. So it's taking last name, it's taking birth date, it's taking social security number from R59 and saying, okay, this should be a person. And then the data comes back from the Social Security Administration and National Department of New Hires saying, yep, we got him. There's then 4 statuses that a household can get: verified, failed, not verified, or deceased. With verified or not verified, we're fine. Either of those are acceptable. With failed or deceased, though, we need to take some kind of action. Failed means one of those things is wrong: last name, social security number, or birth date. And deceased means, frankly, I don't know another way to say it, the person passed away. At least they have, according to the Social Security Administration's records. So when it's a failed verification, odds are we need a new cert. to fix that info, whatever it may be. So go back to the file, your social security card, make sure the number is right, make sure the name is right to the letter, make sure the birth date is right from the birth certificate or whatever you have for the birth date verification. I think it's super rare, but we have had instances where we check everything and it's right, it's good. Another option on that would be, it's possible you have like the social security card you received had a maiden name and their name has since changed. That's something to ask about. But very rarely it does happen where, you know, everything we have is right, and that's what it is. On the deceased, if you get a deceased result, there's kind of two directions you could go here, right? If it's a single member household, then this is ultimately going to be a move out. It'll be a move out with death of sole member is the reason. We'll enter in the date of death, and then we're only entitled to subsidy for 14 days after the date of death. If it's not the sole member, then you're going to remove that household member, the other household member, whoever passed away, and then normal IR rules apply. So if the person was, say, a co-head and disabled and they were getting a $400 deduction, that would actually be an increase in rent if that person had no income. So we would give a 30-day notice for removing that household member. On the other hand, if they had income and we're removing them, that's a decrease, and it'll be effective the first of the month after it's discovered. Questions on those two? I'll just go back to say, not verified sounds bad. It just means we're still working on it. EIV is still trying to match who this person is. We'll see that sometimes with income reports within 90 days of move-ins, and also depending on the timing after an add-on. If there's an add-on and then we're doing another cert after that, we could also see that add-on being listed as not verified. Questions on the summary report though? Yeah. More questions? Everybody ready? Action is required when the summary report shows that someone is not verified, deceased, or canceled. All right, deceased. So deceased is right. Not verified, again, don't have to do anything. And canceled is in a status. You won't see it in the EIV. All right, so let's jump onto the income report itself. We're gonna kind of take this section by section. But first, let's talk about it generally. So again, and this is, we touched on this with the income discrepancy report. Not all income sources are reported through EIV, right? So things like child support or family contributions, pensions, most of the self-employments, even none of that is going to go through EIV. Instead, we're talking about data that's available from the National Directory of New Hires and the Social Security Administration. So that's Social Security benefits, SSI benefits, and dual entitlement, and employment reported through the state wage agency. And this report is matched, use the air quotes on that. So it's matched either on a monthly or quarterly basis. So it's kind of always updating. New hire data is matched monthly. So every single month, every household's data is matched with regard to new hire info. Wages and unemployment, which both also come from the National Directory of New Hires are matched quarterly. And there's a schedule we'll look at here in a second. And then Social Security Administration is matched quarterly for every household. So it's like a cycle, it goes through, and every 3 months, everyone is matched up. Here's that schedule. So the SSA, if your recert month is April, May, June, or July, then your data is going to be refreshed in January, April, July, and October. The National Directory of New Hires, there's 8 months where they're doing the new hire info match, and then every quarter, February, May, August, and November, they're matching the rest of it. So I just have this in here more or less for reference. Don't expect anybody to memorize this. I don't have this memorized. This comes from the 4350, but it's good to have if you're, looking at an EIV report and thinking, why wouldn't this be an EIV when they're telling me they're working? It could very well be just one, either a delay from their employer in reporting it, or two, it just hasn't gotten around to matching the info that you need yet. So when you're looking at EIV income reports, it's pretty crucial to determine whether the tenant is disputing the information or not. So if they're not disputing it or it's not an EIV, we got to print the EIV income report, and then we can use tenant provided documents like check stubs or payroll history to verify that income. Third-party verification from the source is also fine, totally fine. And then any correspondence with the tenant relating to the dispute of that employment. If they do dispute it, then we again still need the EIV income report, but we have to have third-party verification from the source. This is what HUD says. It's not in the real world. I don't know. I don't want to say possible, but how many times do we struggle to get third-party written verification from the source? Always, right? But this is HUD's rule. I think the best we can do is document our efforts and document them, showing we reached out multiple times. If we didn't get anything, then no one can hold it against us. But you're always going to be printing the EIV report and always including the documents that either the tenant provides or the third party provides. So jumping onto the new hire section. Here they're going to list hire dates and employer names. Google these if they don't make sense. Five Below Inc. We probably all could, we all know who that is. Turbo Restaurants, not a clue. But Google the name, Google the address, and that should help you identify who we're talking about. So we've got to review this section and prepare a VOE for anything that hasn't been reported. So if there's already an IR done, already an IR in process, then that can just be our note. If not, we need to print a VOE, get it ready, and have the tenant sign it, either at their AR appointment or when we call them in after receiving an update form. And then note the resolution to that employment. Quarterly wages. I know this looks like Rainbow Bright threw up all over it. But we want notes on anything that is unexplained, again with the air quotes. Unexplained can mean either it's an unreported job that hasn't been previously addressed. During the household's tenancy, that's key, right? So if you see data in here from, let's say 2018 and the household moved in 2020, we don't care. It's employer that we don't know about within their tenancy. Also, anytime there's an income discrepancy, we need to address everything within that period. So if only Takala was showing up and Takala was on their last 2 ARs and there's no EIV income discrepancy, then there's nothing to address here. If there's no EIV income discrepancy, that means the total amount of wages within EIV are within $200 per month of what we had on the last 5/9, and we're golden. It's only if there is an income discrepancy or there's an employer that we don't know about yet. And then we just have notes speaking to each of these. So Takala employment has been verified and included on the previous 5/9s. Goodwill was not reported. This Catfish King was sporadic. And then the Balesa Enterprises was reported and including on 2 previous certs. So in this example, we've got an EIV income discrepancy saying, hey, there's an issue. We looked at all of these employment sources and the issue seems to be Goodwill. There's Goodwill employment, the household never reported. We're gonna prepare a VOE or get a payment history and we'll set up the repayment agreement that way. Unemployment benefits, they have their own section. And unemployment benefits should really be treated in the same way that quarterly wage info is treated. So we can't use these amounts as the verification of income like we would for Social Security. We can't just take this and multiply by 4. This is our third-party verification that we've received, that the household is receiving unemployment benefits. So when we see this on an EIV income report, we need to ask the resident for their a history, a payment history, showing what benefits they received and when, assuming it wasn't previously reported. I'll say we're definitely in the time period where the period of income for discrepancy analysis, and we talked about on the EIV income discrepancy report, includes times where there was those special unemployment compensation benefits. So there were 3 different types of unemployment in 2020 and 2021 when the pandemic was really raging. One of those 3 was excluded as income. The other 2 were counted. So it could be somewhat of a false positive situation where we're getting an EIV income discrepancy, but you should be able to look back at those certs and see why we counted something or didn't count something at the time. But look, just like we did with the EIV income discrepancy report, look at these time periods and look at the certs you did at that time and kind of compare what it's showing versus what we did. And here are those for, so the last one listed here, regular unemployment benefits, is unemployment as we know it. The first 3 are those special ones: disaster unemployment, which was counted, federal pandemic unemployment compensation, which was not counted, and then pandemic emergency unemployment compensation, which was counted. So it really all comes down to that federal pandemic unemployment compensation. If the household was receiving it, it will be included in EIV, but it is not countable income. Clear as mud. All right, so looking at Social Security, SSI, and dual entitlement, unlike employment, EIV can be used as both the verification of the source and the amount. So meaning we can take the amount in EIV and that's all the verification we need. We don't need a separate letter. EIV itself works, so we can use it to calculate income. Just note we're about to enter this special period. So at the end of this month, Susan's going to send out 120-day notices for January ARs. For ARs, January through April, there'll be, well, so let's back up a little bit. In October-ish, COLA will, or the Social Security Administration will release their cost of living adjustment. So basically everybody gets a little bump up. 999 times out of 1,000, that little bump isn't enough to increase a household's income by 200 or more. So it's not anything the household needs to report. Likewise for us, we can just use the amount in EIV for any AR that's effective January, February, March, or April. It may not reflect the COLA yet. Whether it does or it doesn't, we can use the amount in EIV as long as the resident agrees to that amount. The other thing we have to be really careful about with Social Security and SSI is paying close attention to the gross and the net. We almost always want to use the gross income, not net. The only time we would use the net, or the only, I guess, complicating factor for using the gross is we shouldn't count anything that is due to an overpayment. So an overpayment in the Social Security world is similar to our repayment agreement. The household received benefits they weren't entitled to, and so they take a little bit out of their check every month to pay back the Social Security Administration. If that's the case, then we do not count the portion that is the overpayment. What's difficult about that is there's not a way to know in EIV if the net and the gross don't match what that difference is if it's an overpayment. We need to ask for a letter. That's what I just said. I got ahead of myself on the slides. So looking at this household, and I've blurred out all the info. This is looking at that gross versus net. Here we see the 1039 and the net of 869. With Medicare, this buy-in is listed as no. So it's no, and there's $170 a month. No actually means yes, the household is paying for it. So this means the household has a medical expense that would be 170 times 12. And because the gross minus the 170 is equal to the net 869, that's all we need to know. So on this calc sheet, we would put in 1039 times 12 for their income, and we'd put in 170 times 12 for a medical expense. Disability status in EIV. Disability status means nothing in EIV, so you can ignore it. If a household is eligible for a disability deduction, we should have verification of it elsewhere. Typically, that would be their original Social Security letter, which would say that they're eligible for disability. But that disability listed in EIV is unreliable, and we shouldn't use it for anything. All right, quiz question. When must quarterly wages be notated? Always when there's an EIV discrepancy, when there's income that wasn't reported. That's 6 out of 11. B and C. So again, on the quarterly wages, if everything checks out in terms of the, there's no income discrepancy and there aren't any employers listed that we don't know about within the quarterly wage section, then we're good. We don't need to make a note. If there's an EIV discrepancy or there's an employer we don't recognize, we do need to figure that out, make notes, get a VOE signed, and then create any corrections or new certs as needed. A no in the Medicare buy-in section means household is in the process of setting it up. Texas pays for Medicare. EIV has no information regarding Medicare, or the household pays for Medicare. household pays for Medicare is correct. 90%. All right, let's talk about a few differences in when we're printing the income report within 90 days of move-in. So first, this is really all about those quarterly wages. And if there's unemployment, unreported employment listed in that quarter prior to or within the quarter that the household moved in, we need to get a VOE out and figure out what's going on. So this is really to make sure that, you know, we start fresh. The household is, everything we have on their move-in checks out. So for example, if the household were to move in on June 5th, we would want to look at the quarter, the second quarter of 2022 and forward to make sure that all the employment listed there in EIV matches what we have on the 5/9. The second thing is there's this separate date EIV verified step in Yardi. So whenever you print the report, you'll put this date in, the date EIV verified, and click the update date EIV verified in Yardi. This is audited by John and by Christian monthly to make sure we don't miss any of these. This is one of those things where if we don't do it, it's an uncorrectable finding. We can't turn the clock back and fix it. So make sure you're putting this date in. That's the signal to kind of take it off the list. Let's talk about new hires. So there's actually several different reports that Susan and Payal run either monthly or quarterly. Most of the time it's done behind the scenes without you guys knowing. Where your paths tend to cross the most is the new hires report. So just like in the EIV income report, there's a new hires section that shows, you know, new hire dates for various employers for each household member. There's also this master new hire report that just takes everyone on the property and shows everyone with a recent new hire date. That's what they're reviewing. They'll pull this report and look tenant by tenant. And what they're looking for is first in Laserfish, is there already an update form for this? So one, it's crucial those update forms get scanned in and the IRs created quickly. So they're looking for that first. If they don't see that an IR is already started, they're going to see if the employer is on the work number. If so, they'll go ahead and print that report. But in any case, if there's not already an IR started in Laserfish because the resident reported, they're going to create an IR. They'll create a folder and put that report in as reason for why we're creating the interim. We just tweaked this process, so I'm hoping to kind of talk through the specifics, make sure you guys are clear on who's doing what. So again, they're going to create that IR folder. Then they're going to mail a notice of potential failure to report changes in income out to the household. They'll email you and copy, attach that letter so you know what's going on. The letter outlines that the household has 10 days to come in and discuss with you of this potential failure to report a change. It also says that if they don't come in within the 10 days, then their assistance will be terminated and they'll be required to pay market rent. So now, anytime this letter goes out, we are tracking it in Monday.com. We have a terminations board that started out just for failure to recertify, but we're now including required transfers, and now we're including EIV. So if we send out this letter, they have 10 days again to come meet with you. If they don't come in, we're going to send them another letter saying, hey, we already sent you a letter. We're going to terminate your assistance effective this date. So if the household does come in after receiving that letter, you'll have them sign a VOE and process the cert. So have them sign the VOE, we'll send it out, we'll get it back. If it turns out they were working, we'll do a retroactive cert. If it's identity theft or a situation where, you know, they were hired, but they haven't started working yet, then we'll wait for when that happens. If they do not come in, again, they'll send that second letter and they'll coordinate with you on terminating assistance. But ultimately, it's your job. Once they create the folder, it's an IR just like any other. It needs to be worked. The difference here is rather than 2 7-day letters and it coming from the household having submitted an update form, it's coming from this EIV report and they got 10 days. And I'm hoping these links work in the handouts, but there's a workflow that kind of outlines who all is doing what. And that's linked from the EIV reports processing SPG. All right, I think this is our last round of quiz questions. The income discrepancy report needs to be printed with the income report within 90 days of move-in. True or false?
I pressed the wrong button. Can I take it back?
I don't know, actually. This is funny. I've never been on the user end of Slido. I don't even know what y'all see.
I think it lets you change.
False. So yeah, with the EIV, so with the 90-day, with the income report printed within 90 days of move-in, the only report needed is the income report, not the summary, not the income discrepancy report. So you only have to print that one income report. Households must respond within 10 days of receiving the potential failure to report change in income notice, or else we'll evict, we'll terminate assistance and charge market rent, we'll initiate a 3-year back file audit, or we'll stick Jim on them. I was hoping Jim would be here so he'd get a good laugh. No such luck. 100%. Yay. We will terminate assistance and charge market rent. It is correct. All right, now let's briefly talk through the existing tenant search, and we will have some time for questions. So in going back through John's monthly audit trends emails, I think this is by far the most common one, is missing resolution notes on the EIV existing tenant search. So we're always required to coordinate the move, and that coordination should be noted on the report itself. If it's internal, certainly there's no excuse. We should be able to talk to each other, coordinate dates. So, I mean, to be perfectly honest, HUD has set up a really difficult system to navigate where in their mind, you're moving out of a property one day, you keep all your stuff in a U-Haul, and the next morning you move into the other property. We know life doesn't work that way. We've created this system where, you know, the resident basically has 3 days to move without, you know, we won't penalize them. But after that, if we still don't have the keys yet, then we'll terminate and do an IC later down the road, charging market rent for those days.
Brian,
Yes, ma'am.
quick question. Okay, because of course the existing tenant report, that's not ran. I know we run it, but it's not ran in admissions, or because I remember it seemed like in our public housing file there was a flag or something that indicated existing tenant. Am I right in remembering that at one time, perhaps?
Admissions does run it, and you do get the report when they move over the file.
Right. So, and the reason I'm asking the question is that, do you think is it discussed with the resident at that time, saying, okay, I see you have housing in Williamson County, so prior to contacting the assigned property, make sure you let them know you're moving. Of course, do you think that's being discussed? Because I think that's, if not, it should be. So, and then we piggyback on it, because sometimes we do forget, as you said, it's a trend that that John is seeing that we're missing. But do you know how it is discussed in admissions, basically? Or
I
if it's
think it is discussed generally, but once it leaves admission, they're not going to be able to speak to the specifics. When the caseworker is meeting with them, they don't know when they're going to be assigned a unit. When it's going to you is when things are much more set in stone. So this should be one of the first things you're looking at when you get a new move in. The first thing to either cross on your list, okay, like at least I don't have to worry about this, or okay, I need to keep this on my radar. But this is hugely important. Going back to the first thing I said, this is near and dear to HUD's heart. They love EIV, and this reporting specifically and making sure that they're not paying for the same household in two different places. This is a huge issue in compliance, is making sure that we work this out. So the specifics of the move, the dates, all of that is definitely up to you as property management. Admissions does print a report. They do talk about it generally from the conversations I've had with Laura, but they're not going to be able to say, all right, so your plan, you need to move out, August 19th, so you can move into Rosewood or Santa Rita or wherever on the 20th. They can't get into that detail because they don't know when the household's moving. That's up to you as management. That answer your question?
Yes, thank you.
And I mean, again, the biggest thing is talking with the tenant, making sure they understand their obligations. And that move or agreement to move out, making sure you're having them sign that.
Hey, B.
Hey.
In the move-in, is there a doc show that has the existing tenant search in it, if I'm not mistaken, like the doc show with the move-in folder that they send over?
Yeah, it has its own doc show.
Right, so there's a document in there. It usually is because there always was one in there, but if you open it up, it should tell you if they're dual subsidy. And also in the emails that we get from Laura Bodai, if that's a situation, she always includes that in the email as well. So if we're reviewing the move-in, as we should before we have the resident actually move in, it should be in there regardless if it'll show, I think, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, it's there. Yeah, it's there. I just wonder, do they discuss it with them about, getting in contact with their current provider? I mean,
they do. It's part of the orientation and
okay.
admission.
Okay.
All right, one last round of quiz questions. We'll find our Cajun winner. It is possible to have too many notes on the EIV income report. I was hoping to make Nancy and John laugh with this question. I think I was 2 for 2.
John, it says voting. Brian, it says voting.
Sorry, what'd you say?
It says voting closed.
Mm.
Oh, no, never mind. Mine just came
Gotcha.
up.
Okay.
It's up now.
False. Maybe it's true. I've never seen it though. CCP is our winner. Congrats, CCP. I'll put this in your box at Central. All right, so that's all I had planned, but did want to leave some time for questions. EIV is a big old topic. I'm sure we didn't cover everything over the last 3 months. Is there any specific questions or reports anybody wants to ask about?
Okay, I do have a question. As it relates, if we were to find an income discrepancy on a file, And depending on the amount, does that ever come into play, the amount that was, or the time that was reported? Let's say I have, if you can look at account 15, I have an income discrepancy of this young lady who says she didn't work at Victoria's Secrets. It was just for like, it looks as though it may have been a week or